Though many would argue that Spongebob Squarepants had been on something of a decline for years, with some even going as far as to say it hasn't been good since the third season, the death of series creator Steven Hillenburg opened the door to a different kind of quality decline that the show had never really seen before, not even in its worst years. Because, as is famously known, Steven Hillenburg didn't want SpongeBob to have spin-offs of any kind and managed to pull the plug on all the studio's various plans at creating ones to capitalize on its success. But after he died, they wouldn't be held back any longer and released two spin-off shows to Spongebob Squarepants, with those being Kamp Koral and the Patrick Star Show, as well as some spin-off movies such as Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. And today, I'd like to go over why making these spin-offs was a very bad idea. And I'd just like to note that I might get a little heated once or twice, as this is a topic I'm very passionate about. So in case that's something you're not comfortable with, please feel free to skip over this video. Okay, so the simplest reason for why SpongeBob Squarepants should have never had any spin-offs is because Steven Hillenburg didn't want it to. And contrary to what some believe, yes, it is a known fact that Steven Hillenburg didn't want SpongeBob to have any spin-offs, and even talked the studio out of doing them on a few occasions, which is one example being a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy spin-off that the episode The Bad Guy Club for Villains was actually a backdoor pilot to. Now, while Ernest Borgnine and Tim Conway's age did factor into why the studio decided not to do it, the biggest reason they canceled it is because Steven Hillenburg asked them not to do it. He did not want SpongeBob to have any spin-offs, period. And he particularly didn't want a spin-off centered around the SpongeBob characters as babies or small children, which is what makes Kamp Koral especially insulting. Because as I noted in my video on Spongebob Squarepants, which you can find a link in the description to, Steven Hillenburg is ultimately the reason the show exists in the first place. The whole thing was his idea, and everybody else who contributed to its success were building off of his ideas. So if there is no Steven Hillenburg, there would simply be no Spongebob Squarepants. So is it really asking too much that his wishes be honored after his extremely unfortunate and untimely death? Because I know I can only speak for myself when I say this, but considering he's the reason the show exists at all, if he didn't want any spin-offs to it, that's good enough for me. And it is also for that reason that I will never acknowledge or watch them, because not only are they a slap in the face to him and his legacy, but they also dishonor the integrity of the show in the process. That's even why I haven't, nor will I, play any clips from either spin-off show in this video. I refuse to give them the dignity of any kind of acknowledgement. The posters are as far as I will take it. And this is of course what leads to one of the biggest problems with these spin-offs. The fact that they've been spilling over into the actual show. And it's like, it's bad enough that they had to dishonor Steven Hillenburg with their mere existence, but putting in plugs for shows he expressly did not want into his host show is another thing altogether. And as a loyal SpongeBob fan, I can't really think of anything comparable to the burning agony of turning on a new episode of SpongeBob and not knowing if the whole thing is going to be ruined from the word go because some stupid narwhals or Patrick's fake parents are going to show up. I'm telling you, Being a SpongeBob fan while also being devotedly loyal to Stephen Hillenburg is not an easy thing, and has made looking forward to new SpongeBob episodes that much harder, because you never know if it's going to be real SpongeBob or some fake spin-off nonsense just masquerading as SpongeBob. But there are more practical reasons beyond just Stephen Hillenburg not wanting them for why they should have never been made. Because for one thing, SpongeBob has never been known for its continuity. I even got into that in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too. But there are certain things about it that are concrete fact that you can't change. For example, SpongeBob met Mr. Krabs in the first episode, Sandy in the second, and Plankton soon afterwards, and not before. And Patrick's parents look just like him with a mustache and wig, and he has no sister. Yeah, we won't talk about that episode and just go by what he says in Something Smells. And the fact that these spin-offs just defy all of that shows how lacking in integrity they really are. Because if they were being made with genuine passion, they wouldn't be creating all of these extremely obvious plot holes. Like the Fairly Odd Parents, A New Wish, for example, works with what was already established and builds on it as best it can. It doesn't just do whatever it wants because the executives demanded it. Though this has to be the most obvious in the Sandy Cheeks movie, as it was said that the creative team was barely involved and all the decisions were made by the executives. And boy did it show! You see, this is what happens when Stephen Hillenburg isn't there to keep them in check. Now, before I go any further, I would just like to note that I am not promoting, nor do I condone any hatred for anybody who's worked on these spin-offs. In fact, if there was one good thing to say about them, it would be that they've given so many people good jobs. I understand that the creatives behind SpongeBob probably wanted to honor Stephen Hillenburg's wishes and only got involved in spin-offs because the executives forced them to. So I harbor no ill will against them, and nobody else should either. As far as I'm concerned, all of these spin-offs are on the executives who dishonored Stephen Hillenburg's wishes in the name of easy money, and nobody else. But the point is that, and I know I say this at the risk of being laughed at, SpongeBob can still be good. I even dedicated a whole other video to a particularly good episode of Modern SpongeBob, which you can also find a link in the description too. Even in the seasons after Stephen Hillenburg's death, certain episodes that don't feature anything having to do with the spin-off shows have actually been pretty funny. I'd even single out Big Top Flop, Sandy Help Us as the perfect summary of what modern SpongeBob has become. Because on the one hand, Big Top Flop has got a unique plot, a one-off villain that's easily hateable, funny gags that work within the story, doesn't take the grotesqueness too far, and perhaps most notably, has a very impressive sequence featuring Squidward doing a sad clown routine. While on the other, Sandy Help Us starts out with Sandy acting out of character by outright admitting she's performing an illogical experiment, and the gags aren't really all that funny and rely more on dumbed down humor. And then, halfway through, they bring in one of those stupid narwhals from that disgraceful spin-off and have her hijack the rest of the episode. Never mind that Sandy shouldn't have any idea who she is, or that she'd be the worst person to call in an emergency. A character like that still has no place in this show. So now you might be thinking I'm a lunatic, but also wondering what exactly my point is here. That this 22-minute episode perfectly sums up everything that's both right and wrong with modern SpongeBob in a nutshell. When the creatives are actually allowed to be creative, they can make something pretty dang good like Big Top Flop. But when they're forced into all this spin-off nonsense that never should have existed, the writing becomes subpar, like in Sandy, Help Us. And that is yet another reason why SpongeBob should have never had any spin-offs. They're stretching the creative team way too thin, and the show everybody really cares about does suffer as a result, both from the forced inclusion of spin-off material and from just lower quality writing in general. The point here is, nothing good has come from SpongeBob SquarePants having spin-offs. Absolutely nothing. And it was much better off when it didn't have them. Though at least Kamp Koral did get cancelled, so there is that. If only the same would happen to the Patrick Star Show, then things would be in a much better place for SpongeBob overall. As far as the spin-off movies go, let them make them, because not only are they a lot easier to ignore, but it's also much easier for them to flop and have the plug pulled on them as a result. But before I take things too far, all I'm really trying to say here is, SpongeBob SquarePants can still be a good show. Maybe not as great as it once was, but still good. But in order for it to continue to be good, all this emphasis on these spin-offs nobody needed or asked for has got to stop and return to what the late, great Stephen Hillenburg had always meant it to be. Alright, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now it's your turn to tell me. Do you believe that SpongeBob SquarePants should have never had any spin-off shows or movies, if only because it was what the series creator Stephen Hillenburg would have wanted? Or do you believe that this is definitely a case of the more, the merrier? Please let me know in the comments below. And let me just once again reiterate that I was promoting no hatred towards the people who work on these shows, and even said I was happy that their existence gave them a job. The only people I have a bone to pick with are the executives who forced these shows into existence. And that's all. And in the same vein, if you disagree with everything I said in this video, that is totally fine. You can feel about SpongeBob SquarePants having spin-offs any way you want to, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.